so much. So allow me to share my screen this morning. And good morning, everyone. But before we begin, I was given the task this morning to discuss about reviewing the literature and understanding one of my favorite approaches in research, qualitative research design and methodology. But before that, I would just like to maybe let me just check, do some pulse check before we begin, just to give me an idea as to who are with us this morning. And let me just check if we are all on the same boat this morning. Let's do some Mentimeter this for a while. Okay, so I think I can share this. How do I do that? Okay. Maybe I will just a few moments, dear participants, and good morning to all our participants from all over the world. So before we begin, may I just ask, this is qualitative research. Everybody, each participant is important or significant. May I just ask, how are you today? And you could answer me by going to menti.com and using the code 87601883. Again, you can go to menti.com and use the code 87601883. Let me just check if we are all okay, doing great. Oh, really great, really feeling great. We have 3 respondents and they are all good this morning. This is exciting. Yeah. So almost everyone is ready for my discussion this morning. May I just also do some check? What about your perception about reviewing related literature? And as I was informed, this is in the context of educational research under empirical research, considering that most of our participants are teachers. What are your thoughts? Okay, if not thoughts, let me just have, does reviewing literature trigger some emotions from our participants? If not thoughts, emotions. Is it positive or negative when you're, for example, a tedious process? Yeah, it is. What else? Let me just check before we begin. Lots of reading. Sad. Okay. You feel sad when somebody asks you to do some review. Okay. Lots of reading, analysis. Yeah, so this is somewhat interesting. Synthesizing. We will be discussing proper citation. Yeah, we will be discussing some of these things this morning. Okay. Credibility of sources. Yeah, we will also be discussing that. So let me just go back to my presentation. Okay. Let me just go back to my presentation this morning. Yeah. So for this morning, as I have shared earlier, our learning journey is actually, we will discuss literature review. Of course, how do we review literature, the what, the hows, and the whys of literature review. And then, of course, we will also have some discussion on qualitative research design and methodology. In particular, we will define a research design and a research methodology. And then, of course, how do we use it practically, these terms, and maybe some tips in, how do we teach them and how do we apply understanding literature review and qualitative research. So let me just proceed, of course, with our learning outcomes, teacher and a teacher. So after actively participating in this presentation workshop, actually, we hope that our participants will understand the process and the importance of reviewing the literature. You will better identify the significant role that the educational researcher you play in qualitative research, and of course, review or reflect on your own research experiences and determine your own plan of action to a successful qualitative research journey in the new normal. So this is what we hope to achieve at the end of this 1.5 or 2 hour presentation. So I think everyone is ready. The last session about inquiry and really maybe understanding how do we process knowledge or information. That is actually the start of understanding, or that is the planning stage, understanding the information that we will be getting. And then after you have actually identified your research questions, your topics and variable, we will proceed with reviewing your literature. My dear colleagues in the academe, with the massive information that we have right now, of course, we have text and other resources, online and offline. It was actually mentioned earlier that it is a tedious task. Yes, not only tedious, but really this is a challenging task for a researcher. But as I've mentioned, we need to explore what other scholars have actually done in our particular topic and what else is still needed. So most of the time, the review of your literature have these basic components, or your literature review. They have the description of the paper, of course, or of the research that was being reviewed, or that is being reviewed by the researcher, a summary of the paper's main points, a discussion of gaps in research, and an evaluation of the paper's contribution to the topic. So in general, this is your survey of the scholarly sources that provide an overview of your particular topic. So this is now, again, this is not just a listing, but now this is a collection of the relevant and significant publication regarding your topic in order to provide your readers. So it is important that you identify your readers to provide them a comprehensive look of what has been said on the topic and who said those things. So the author is also important in reviewing our literature. So in our discussion, specifically along the way, I have two parts. Later, the design. In our discussion first of the literature review, we have to bear in mind that, is it in my end? That the literature is not all the same quality. Okay? Meaning, there are different kinds of sources, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. And of course, once you all immersed yourself in reviewing your literature, you always need to keep a record of your searches. Okay? And it is also necessary that you tell a coherent story. I will always tell my students, and my advisees, both in undergraduate and master's degree, that they are not actually listing references. This is not an annotated bibliography. Your literature review is actually telling a story. It also has its introduction, its body, and conclusion. And along the process, you are trying to create, or to help you or to guide you, you're actually creating a storyboard so that when the time comes that you are writing your literature, you are critically aware, or you will be having this informed decision of what to include and exclude in your literature. And of course, this will be dependent again on the variables, on the topics that you have decided to study. So let us first remember that when we talk of literature review, and how do we define now literature? In the context of Bicol University, we have a portion in our thesis like review of related literature and studies. But if you are going to look also into other universities, they don't usually separate that, they don't usually give that distinction in their publication. So they will just have the review of related literature. Literature can be almost anything that represents the result of a research or any scholarly output on a certain subject. It could be books, it could be articles, it could also be conference proceedings, gray literature, your dissertations and theses, websites, and again, all other output or anything that represents the results of a research or a scholarly activity or scholarship. So just running through these sources, you will really be getting lots of paradigms or perspectives and thoughts and ideas that will help you in truly finding the niche of your study. Of course, you have to be mindful, as I've mentioned earlier, you have to be critically aware, you have to apply critical thinking because some references have more credibility over the others. So we will be discussing how we can search reliable sources, specifically in this time of distance learning modality, or what we so-called the new normal. Again, your review should tell a story. So in telling the story, your aim is actually to examine, again, the literature for material that is, the term is relevant for your research topic. So you will ask yourself, what have other people done that is relevant to my research question? You don't actually you don't usually reinvent the wheel. What I mean is you wanted to check that your review is actually based or is actually established on a position on the existing field. For example, if you are if your field is in science or mathematics, that is where your field is, and you are going to find the niche in that field. And you could actually do that by reviewing your literature. So again, you need to be mindful. Summary actually is not too difficult, but if in providing a review, you need to fully identify what is needed. What are your inclusionary and exclusionary standards or criteria? So as I've mentioned, it should also provide a reader with a comprehensive look at the previous discussion or what other people have actually conducted. So generally, this is the purpose of your literature review, to provide a review, to establish your position, and then of course, to provide the reader a comprehensive look. So in literature review, it will be different or it will vary depending on what particular paper or what particular research you are doing. So in dissertation, there are certain standards. In master's thesis, actually in other countries, dissertation is for master's degree holder because it's shorter. Thesis is actually for PhD because it requires longer. The word count is actually higher compared to dissertation, but we in our context in the Philippines, we use it interchangeably, but we're looking at the same thing. These are all literature review. And if you are familiar with, to those who have their research or their reading activities before, if you're familiar with the SQ2R method by Francis Robinson, in our context, in literature review, Gary Thomas in 2017 actually removed another R and he developed the SQ2R process in reviewing the literature. So he identified, of course, this process. The first one is to survey or skim the whole piece. So you have just to remember the key nuggets or information. The second one is you question or ask yourself, what do you really intend to find out? Because you cannot read, or we will not be able to read everything that will be actually given to us. And the R is you read the whole piece. So once you skim, so most of the time, what do we do as researchers? We check the abstract. And then that is initially, we are already sifting or identifying what to include or not to include in our review. And then we question. That is now where you will ask, that is the time where you will ask yourself, what are the irrelevant literature that you don't want to include in your paper? And then, of course, if you find relevant literature, this is now the time that you will really read the whole piece. And most of the time, that this is also the moment where I read the methodology and the conclusion. And then after that, you recall, this is where, according to Gary, this is where you jot down notes. And of course, if you cannot recall everything, you go back to surveying or skimming again. This is a good strategy, as if we could share this with our students, because it will also avoid them in making the mistake of unintentional plagiarism, because jotting down the notes and understanding the references in your own words will help you the moment that you wanted to write it, and you've already started paraphrasing the term or the thesis. However, whether or not you are using the SQ2R method, you can always, this is just a personal strategy in selecting the literature. I will always have a folder in my drive because I do love reading. So there are always folders where I put or I place different related literature, because sometimes I am doing a research for another topic, and then when you come out with an interesting literature, you could actually already collect them, whatever process or whatever model you are following. However, in general, let me just give to you the 5 steps. Different authors will call them different things, but generally, a successful review only has a successful review. Of course, you need to plan your review, you need to conduct the review, and you need to report or write your review. So, to be specific, in the planning, of course, you need to identify, of course, or specify your research question. This is where you identify your key terms. And then, of course, the next one is you locate your literature and you critically evaluate and select the literature, you organize the literature, and you write the review. So this is actually from Creswell. Another model that I am actually using is from Punch and Wansea, also from 2014. So the same 5 steps you could compare. For Punch and Wansea, they actually introduced searching the literature, screening the literature, summarizing and documenting, organizing, analyzing, synthesizing, and of course, writing your literature. So in screening, usually I follow this model of Punch in educational research. Of course, in searching, you have to identify relevant and credible sources. In screening, it could be substantive screening, meaning you are looking for the content, or it could also be methodological screening. When we talk of methodological screening, you are looking into the design, the sample, the data collection, data analysis, and interpretation of the literature that you are actually reviewing. And of course, after that, you summarize. This is now where you capture the main points of the paper. And you document. In summarizing and documenting, this is important. This is actually necessary. How do we do documenting? Documenting or indexing and filing system. Because do not ever, please avoid that common mistake of not citing properly. You will not cite properly. For example, after reading 20 related literature and studies, if you do not have a good filing, indexing, or documenting system, you will really lose the sources, and you might not able to cite them properly, and it will be a waste of time. So while you are summarizing, it is like in summarizing, you are like doing your annotated bibliography here, that you are identifying the key points and you identify the resources. And we have later on, I will be sharing different reference management tool that you could use in your research. And then organizing, analyzing, and synthesizing, actually they are not sequential. That is why I put a slash there. Oftentimes they are overlapping. You organize your literature in different ways. Sometimes you identify common elements, or you organize them according to their similarities and differences. Other researchers will organize their literature or their studies according to common theory. There are also other ways of organizing your literature. In the simplest pattern, the simplest pattern of organizing your literature is actually the chronological pattern. This is the simplest approach. What you do here, you trace the development of the topic over time. So for example, you check the history of, for example, what particular approach are we working? Like game-based instructional materials for science, or for example, your instructional material development, or any other related to that. You will just identify, you will just help your audience be familiarized with the topic by introducing them according to the development. So if you are going to use this strategy, just be careful that your literature review will not seem like you are just listing it, or you are just summarizing them in order. So just be mindful of that. Even if you are using the chronological way of organizing your literature, make sure that you are trying to analyze the pattern. Are there any patterns or turning points, or even key debates? This is something that I love in chronological literature review, in organizing chronological paper. Chronologically, and analyzing your paper chronologically, something that I really wanted is when I see the debates in the turning points of the research or of the topic. So you also need, of course, to give your interpretation of that topic. However, different disciplines have different requirements. So please just check. For example, if you're a student, check with your teacher. If you are a faculty member, check with the guidelines or the the structure of the university or the organization you belong. So just be mindful of that. Other researchers, and this is the most common way of organizing the review, they organize it thematically, meaning they organize it by theme. So if they found recurring themes in the research or in the papers that they are reviewing, they will organize it according to subsections. So those were their themes. So most of the time, for example, this is not yet explicitly observed in the university, but most literature review nowadays, they have the subheading. Like, yeah, the subtopic is literature review. For example, chapter 2, literature review. Other qualitative design, they go with the traditional approach, wherein there are only 4 chapters, meaning literature review is included in chapter 1. So usually it is thematic. They have the subheading. So if you're, for example, you are doing a feminist study or study on women, maybe there will be a subheading on roles of women, functions and appreciation characteristics and all of that. And they do that with subheading. So that is the thematic way of organizing your literature. As I've mentioned, another way is if you can screen methodologically, you can also organize them methodologically. Meaning if you have actually some action researchers, no, they do methodological organization. Because if you draw from different disciplines, like for example, all of the research are coming from the different discipline and they use variety of research methods. So that is the time that, okay, this particular educational research use case study, this one is actually experimental, and then another one will be correlational. So that's how they organize it. So for instance, they compare what is now their point of analysis. They compare most of the time qualitative versus quantitative approach, empirical versus theoretical. What else? They divide it according whether it is a sociological method, historical method, or cultural method. So sometimes you could read them. And of course, the last one, we've mentioned theories, is the theoretical organization. So this is particularly common to humanities, other social sciences, if they really wanted to work on, developing theory or critiquing existing theory. So they are on that particular organization or organization method or style. And in terms of analysis, this is now where you break the literature and discuss the relationship. And then when you synthesize, if in analyzing you break them, in synthesizing you connect them, you make connections between the different literature that you have. So that is usually how we do literature review. And I hope that, this is not, again, this is not prescriptive. These are only giving options to our researchers so that by the time that you actually publish your paper, actually you can publish even just the portion of your literature review if you are doing it well in your dissertation or in your thesis. And how do we now search for literature review? I will just be sharing, of course, the first point is your university library. That is the first option. Most of the time, the library will help you. Or you could also use a computerized databases, specifically in this time of pandemic. So I have mentioned here, these are educational research related only. I know, but we have other, if it's health related, you have your PubMed, other sciences, they also have their databases. And of course, journal websites and interlibrary resources. So how do we actually do that? Most of the time, I ask my students to, if you're doing it online, Google Scholar, this work in much the same way as Google, but this actually is more targeted. So meaning this is more on a scholarly reading. So you can access it, via link. You can just, if you open Google in the More tab, if I'm not mistaken, but usually I just type scholar.google.com and this tab will open, and then I could just, search, and in few minutes I could actually, you know, uh, gather, or I could actually have lots of references in this particular example. You can also, modify your search and personalize it. You can type, targeted inquiry in particular. And yeah, you can open, if there are PDF uh, sites here, meaning full text is available. But if not, you could just click the link actually. So for example, I could open this link and I could read them. And I will go back to the method. I will now scan it first and then check if it is included. And then other sources, of course, Google Books. I also use Google Books and my literature review. So Google Scholar, if you think Google Scholar is not enough for you, so we also have our Google Books. So however, this is somewhat limited if you are not actually subscribed, because some of the books are actually, you need to pay them. Some are available for reading. Some only provide limited pages. So yeah, most of the time you need to search with the specific terms, because for example, if you search, general term, it could also give you some sources, but it will not bring you what you really wanted, or what you need for the moment. And of course, this is actually a software that you can download, the publish or perish software. So there are lots of academic citations in here. So variety of data sources is available. Yeah, even Google Scholar is actually included in here. So yeah, even the citation index, you could actually check them, and you could evaluate how many are actually reading those particular paper. And I think there are so much more. Yeah, Eric, I've mentioned Eric already. The Education Resources Information Center. This is another a site that you could actually look for relevant or related literature. And then psych info is actually for psychologists if you are but most of the time they also include allied disciplines of psychology like education, linguistics, medicine, nursing, physiology, psychiatry, and sociology. So there are dozens of other subject-specific databases, my dear colleagues in the academe. So the first thing that you should do is to really go to appropriate library webpage. Our BU librarian will really help you. If you are from other university, your university librarian could help you. But generally, most universities nowadays, they have public library. Like you could access some sources from them. And other thing, in the Philippines, we also have, our Philippine e-journal that you could also check for your related literature. So yeah, those were just some of the sources, databases that you could look for or that you could check later on. So let's proceed with the reference manager. Okay, so one of the advantages of using databases, like for example, the ERIC that I have shared earlier. So I'm a fan of that. I usually look for my related literature or studies there, is that I could easily export the citation. So I will not be having any problem in my references or list of references. So there are different reference managers that you could actually use. So my reference management software is actually EndNote. This was actually, provided by my former university. We also have web-based reference management system like the RefWorks. You can actually have free access if your university subscribes to it. And of course, we also, I'm using EndNote. ProSite is also a reference manager. You can highlight. In EndNote, I usually do it for highlighting the text because I can upload PDF there. Mendeley is also being used as a reference management software. And I think most of the engineering students, I don't know in BU, but they are using that. And in Microsoft Word, if you don't have a software in particular, Microsoft Word has actually the tab. If, of course, I think if it is licensed, I don't know if it is also working with other software, but in Microsoft Word, you have the tab. I was not able to screenshot it, but you have the tab there where you could actually automatically add references. And you could automatically also identify what particular citation style you will be using. So for education, we use APA, but other schools, other universities will use different citation style. Other universities use Harvard or Chicago. Of course, other field of specialization have their own citation style as well. But the sciences, I am not so sure with science and math education because CSE or the Council of Science Editors, they also have their own citation style. Okay, so let me now proceed with critical awareness in reviewing your literature. So I hope that by 10, I'm done with literature review and then we'll proceed with the different designs in qualitative research. So critical awareness, or actually your critical thinking in reviewing the literature, is a significant characteristic that you need to really develop. So because the key thing in reviewing our literature, my dear colleagues, is that it is not more so on the amount of knowledge, but it is actually your attitude towards that knowledge or towards whatever data you will be collecting. So it is not, there will be issues in the gathering of available literature, but you need to be aware that there will be different ways of interpreting some observation and different ways of arguing a case. So in short, you need to recognize and you need to demonstrate that you know how to recognize which among the the sources that you have found are valid and really reliable or credible. So that is why your critical awareness is really important. So how do you really approach your review? So in short, for example, this is just as Halden puts it, the duty of doubt, or if you are more of the Descartes side, Rene Descartes, doubt is the origin of wisdom. Meaning, simply put, you are not thinking that the author is lying, but you are just looking into, there is some degree of skepticism in reviewing the literature. So you need to ask yourself, it is not only for people who are speaking. Sometimes we have a critical spirit. That's not it. We need to critique, critical awareness. So you are not just only spotting biases. If you think a certain paper has, certain level of biases, but it is about an awareness of the knowledge that actually is produced by a specific study. So, critical awareness, you should use it with critical or with reflective thought as well. So, let us see. Maybe to put it, you need to ask yourself this question. Once you actually find or locate your references, ask these questions. Do you think there are any vested interest at play? That is why most of the time you could see a declaration that there is no conflict of interest in a certain paper. Because you need to be critical in terms of the result as well, and the methodology and how they presented the paper. You ask yourself, might the writer's objectives in undertaking the research sway their reasoning in some way? So yeah, that is why ethics is also so important, research ethics in particular. You might also ask yourself, would different methods have yielded different findings? So you are not just reading the output, that is why it is really tedious because you go beyond the summary and you go beyond just reading the result. You even ask yourself, is there evidence of balance, or are sources being cherry-picked? Or what is the quality of the data being drawn upon? Is it from good primary sources? And of course, you will also ask, is the writer's reasoning sound? So for example, you are the researcher, you are reading a particular literary text. What will you say if you're actually talking to that author face-to-face or that researcher? Again, you need to be aware, no? Critical awareness, and at the same time, you also need to be reflective in a way that you also ask yourself, how valid is your criticism? Okay? Or, are you also putting tradition, sentiment, self-vested interest in reviewing the literature? So again, this is in the context of qualitative study. The researcher is so important in a qualitative research design. Okay, so two common problems in reviewing the literature. Number one, other students will tell you, I can't find any information. Madam, I can't find any relevant information. Other students will tell you, there is just too much information. So, two sides of the coin in reviewing the literature. Definitely, you cannot, explicitly say that there is no information in your topic of interest. In reality, it might just be, we are not just looking, or what I mean is, we're not looking at the proper places. There are also lots of gray literature that we have not ventured upon. So the students cannot really say that there is no or zero or none in that particular field of interest. Or I think, oh, I moved. Okay. And am I still sharing my slide? I think I've moved it, Sir Al.
You're okay, ma'am.
Thank you po. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So generally, in actually doing the literature review, you might just maybe contextualize or rephrase the term, or even look beyond. It is always how are you framing the key terms and the key concepts in reviewing your literature. So if you are encountering this problem that you have too much information or no information at all, think like a search engine. Okay, earlier I have shared how Google Scholar work, that they will be searching lots of references in literature. So you sort it out, you sort the words, or you know, the references, and find alternative ways of formulating your research question. And definitely you will find some. Okay. So is everyone still with me? I think, yeah, I'm on the last portion of my literature review discussion. Okay. So I will share with you the typology of literature review. So we know what a literature review is. We understand how it is being done, different models. We understand how important it is and what characteristic of a researcher should be, emphasized. And let's proceed with the typology of literature review. So I don't know if you have met these terms, but the first category of review is actually the descriptive review. This is the most common, and it is easily recognizable because a descriptive review examines the state of the literature as it pertains to a specific research question, your topical area, or concept. So this particular review actually do not aim to expand upon the literature. The researcher will only provide the account of the state of the literature. What is it? What the people are currently, talking about it, or what have been said about it, and what are they talking about regarding that topic now. So usually, that is the descriptive review. But there are different types of descriptive review, and in relation also to qualitative design. I have given some of the authors that you could actually read on. I cannot discuss them one by one or all of them, but we have the narrative review. So under the descriptive review, the narrative review actually is the most common type of review. So this is actually least rigorous and of course costly in terms of time and resources. So an example is the paper of Green, Johnson, and Adams in doing the narrative review. So the focus actually for researchers who are doing or implementing or employing narrative review, they are actually less concerned with assessing the evidence of quality. They are just focused on gathering information. So that is why we call them, as long as it provides substance or context to their paper. So that is why they do this narrative review. Another example also, or another type of descriptive review is the textual narrative synthesis. So we have various authors doing textual narrative synthesis. So, but actually Popeye and her group and Lucas as well, they have, I think, developed a standard data extraction format for the textual narrative synthesis. So this is actually more rigorous compared to the earlier one, the narrative review. So it requires the researcher to be organized because they need to look into homogeneous subgroups of the literature or the one that they are reviewing. So that is why other researchers actually developed or promoted the standard coding format for this particular review. Also, we have MetaSummary, one of the descriptive review types. So Sandelowski also and group has actually, they go beyond the traditional narrative and textual narrative synthesis. What they do, they included both a systematic approach to literature review, and they also added a quantitative element. That is why it is a meta summary in their literature. So they actually extracted findings and, of course, calculated effect sizes. So apart from that, findings. You also have your meta-narrative. So a meta-narrative, apart from Greenhall, we also have actually the first researcher who coined this term is actually Kuhn in 1970. So what they did, meta-narrative actually adds value to the synthesis of, if earlier it's homogeneous, this one it's heterogeneous bodies of literature. So definitely they will investigate and conceptualize the same problem in different ways, or specifically in meta-narrative, they are after the contradictory findings. So that is one example as well of a descriptive review. Another is the scoping review. So in scoping review, this is somewhat similar to, I think, textual narrative synthesis. However, the aim of scoping, the term scoping, is to extract as much relevant data from each piece of literature as possible. So you're scoping data or whatever knowledge has been formed from each literature. So it even includes methodology, your findings, and other variables. So definitely, since this is descriptive, the scoping aims also to provide a snapshot of what is actually the trend now, what is existing in the field. And another category, apart from descriptive, is the test. A testing review actually looks to answer a question about a literature or about the literature, and or most of the time test a specific hypothesis. I will not work on much on this. This is somewhat the two of it, which are actually highly quantitative, like the meta-analysis established by Glass. So this is more of extraction of quantitative data. Bayesian analysis or meta-analysis, it is the same statistically induced review. You have your sources here, but let me just focus on the realist review. This realist review is actually more on policy analysis or policy review. You evaluate policy in practice and looks to answer the question related to that certain policy. And most of the time, researchers, or they have actually also called for a standardized form for extracting data if you are a realist reviewer. So yeah, this is only useful, or this is most of the time useful if you are actually, evaluating policies and you are planning policies or studying policy. And we also have ecological triangulation. So the same with realist review, they if you will adhere to this type of literature review, you are looking to answer the question of what works for what person. That is why it's ecological. But the reason it is ecological triangulation, because not only what works for that person, but what works under what condition, or you are also looking into the outcomes of the research or of the research. And another criteria or another type is the extending review. So you just go beyond the summary of the data and you build up or you create new constructs. So extending reviews are often done through qualitative or mixed literature because of their theory building nature. So definitely most of the time, later on, as I've discussed the different designs and qualitative research, you will definitely, or we will definitely meet extending reviews. Qualitative literature are the most often, this is the most often review that you could see in qualitative literature. So you will also see in qualitative literature, for example, that the overarching or the larger umbrella actually is metasynthesis. Okay, so this is in qualitative and mixed method approaches. So under this umbrella, actually, there are different types. You have your meta-ethnography. So these were the terms who coined the terms. Meta-ethnography, later on, you will be meeting the ethnography as a qualitative approach or a qualitative design. In meta-ethnography, actually, there are 7 major steps. You actually, first, you need to decide on what is relevant to your research interest. You read the study, you determine how the studies are related, you translate the studies into one another, and of course, you synthesize the translations and you express the synthesis. So most of the time in meta-ethnography, you are actually creating a list of concepts in each of the study. So that's how you do meta-ethnography. And if you want to read more, I can just share with you these references. Then of course, we have also thematic synthesis. So thematic synthesis is very similar to meta-ethnography. For thematic synthesis, this utilizes thematic analysis, of course. So themes are extracted from the literature. So most of the time, this is being used if you wanted to organize your literature thematically, okay? Specifically in qualitative literature. So after organizing or extracting themes from the literature, you cluster them, and you synthesize them into analytical themes. So that is actually reflected in the review of Thomas and Harden in 2008, this particular process. So again, the same creation of constructs and expanding. We also have meta-interpretation. So this is actually the term was put forward by Weed in 2005. So you, as the researcher, what you wanted to look into is to improve your systematic review. In meta-interpretation, you wanted to remain true to your epistemology or the way that you view knowledge. How do you really understand knowledge? So you are, in meta-interpretation, you are focusing on a research area rather than the research question at hand. So because you really wanted to, synthesize, identify themes, and even look into different conceptual issues for this matter. And another one for extending review under the umbrella of metasynthesis, you have your meta study. So this is, actually also coined by Zhao, and but it was Patterson and Canham actually who operationalized the term meta study. So meta study is the combination of metadata analysis, meta method, and meta theory. That is why it is called the meta study. So actually Patterson and Canham advocated the meta data analysis portion. So the meta study extracts methodological information from each study. So it is more on the methodology or methods. Another example is actually the critical interpretive synthesis. So they actually arose from the, you have your meta-ethnography. And then, of course, other people or other researchers, this is normal ano po, in the research field, that we critique methods, we critique strategies, and that is really good. That is where we, that is where we advance knowledge. I remember actually a colleague in another university wherein they are actually coining terms and they are validating it even if they are just graduate students. So it means it doesn't matter how long you are doing the research, but you just need to really reflect the rigor, or and explicitly write the processes in your paper. So critical interpretive synthesis actually come from the modification of meta-ethnography. So because they wanted to include diverse literature, and they need to include various methodologies and not only ethnography. So that is why they, about ethnography, the same, it's interpretive framework or point of view. So they need to appraise different literature in different field, or different following different methodology. More importantly, they really wanted the process, the people, Dixon Woods and group, they really wanted to push for the reflexive and exploratory method of reviewing literature. So that is why they have the critical interpretive synthesis. And the last example of extending the review. So most of the extension, again, in your review is used in qualitative design. That is why I did not fully emphasize on the testing and description. These are what we usually see in the literature review of qualitative research. The last one is framework synthesis. Other researchers will call it the best fit framework. So in this framework synthesis review, you need to establish a priori conceptual model. Meaning, before the experiences, before you actually conducted the study, what is existing, what theories are actually available, and that is where you based the collection of your data. That is why you have your framework synthesis review. I will not focus on the critic review. This is, critical review. But most of the time, this is also used in qualitative method. So, or qualitative design. It is called critical review or critiquing review because you have a set of criteria while reviewing the literature. So you judge the literature against a certain standard. So that is why it is a critical review. And of course, you have your hybrid review. If we have the next method design, we also have the hybrid reviews, meaning the review types or methodologies that I have already mentioned, you can mix and combine them. So that is why it is also named, the hybrid review. So it depends on your need, it depends on your context, and it also depends on what criteria you actually have, or what particular topic and what particular question you are actually answering in your study.